God give us the brains to know that when a warrior in a church falls and it is published in God, the reproach is upon not just the fallen one, but even upon the name of the Lord of Israel and upon we ourselves. The Bible says in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 8 and verse 12, that though a sinner do evil 100 times, and his days be prolonged, yet surely I know that it shall be well with them that fear God, which fear before him. Saul has had a long career of iniquity and rebellion, but soon it will catch up with him. His tragic story ends in his death, and also his bones are exhumed and reburied, a very gruesome death for a once promising leader in Israel. But how this can be you or me, and how not to be the Saul of the modern day, we shall find out in today's episode of The Microscope. I am Benjamin Habasa, and this is The Microscope, a program where we take a deeper and closer look at the events and characters of the Bible, and in the end realize that these are not mere stories. Greetings once again, dear viewer of The Microscope. Finally, we are doing the final episode on Saul. Saul has been through a lot, and a lot has been through him. As they say in the modern language, I'm going through a lot and a lot is going through me. And today is no exception. We are with Brother LAWRANCE KAZOOBA. He's the man from today onwards who will be forever identified with the microscoping Saul. Not with his sins, but with his exposition. You're welcome once again.
Yes, thank you, Brother Benjamin. It's always a privilege to be here. And it's remarkable seeing how God deals. That is, now here we're talking about a patriarch. We're talking about a king, a powerful man of influence. And his life ends so tragically like this. Yeah. I think it's a warning to us as well. We seek fame, we seek power, we do all that we can to try to reach that point of greatness. But there is always a warning if we step away and veer so far from God. Not even veering so far, veering from God is the issue.
Yes. Well, all is well that ends well.
Yes.
Our beginnings should never make us with the impression that we have reached. The journey is still way long, and let him that standeth take heed, lest he fall. Saul went to the medium, to the witch at Endor, and found a familiar spirit, a demon from beneath, disguised as Samuel, who in the transaction we see a lot of logical irregularities that make us know that this is not Saul speaking to Samuel. Yes. But this is Saul through a medium speaking to a demon that wants to inspire Saul with some information. And which information is that? Telling him the Lord is against you, tomorrow you will die, and implied is there is no hope for you. don't even seek any redemption for yourself and your family and Israel. The writer speaks in the book, that's Patriarchs and Prophets, page 681 and paragraph 3, and says, oppressed by the horror of despair, it would be impossible for him, that is Saul, to inspire his army with courage. Separated from the source of his strength, he could not lead the minds of Israel to look to God as their helper. Thus, the prediction of evil would work its own accomplishment. Now that's a powerful sentence. Evil made a prediction, and evil would fulfill the same prediction that he himself has made. It is with that outlook and with that picture in mind that we make the words of 1 Samuel chapter 31 and verse 1, where the Bible says, now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. Could you tell me something about satanic predictions and whether he has the power to foretell the future?
Yes, thank you so much. I'll start with a story, one of the most remarkable stories I think I've heard about spiritualism. I've had my own personal experiences with it. Not that I have been a devil worshipper of sorts. I'm just saying I've seen supernatural things, heard and seen some of these things happen. There is a man called Roger Manu, or Mano. He wrote the book, A Trip into the Supernatural. He was one day featured on, I think like a 3-part segment on Amazing Facts in 1998, actually interviewed by Doug Batchelor himself. And in part of his testimony, he mentions that there are 2 levels to this. There is a level where you have a medium that, like Saul had, that through the medium, if this entity could speak, like you see 2 things here. In one portion, Saul is asking, what do you see? What do you do? That the woman is responding. And then in another portion, you see a voice saying, why have you done this? So from that person was actually, in the trip into the supernatural, he was a devil worshipper. And then his story is quite long. But all in all, he's saying there are 2 levels to it. He also mentions that the influence that these entities have is in such a way that they are involved in man's day-to-day activities, man's day-to-day work. They also observe and predict, just like in the book of Genesis, that when the Lord told Eve that your seed, the serpent will bruise the heel and that seed would crush the head. Immediately, the devil was at work through Cain to kill Abel, and then of course Seth. And then you see around the time of Moses something similar. You see there's that pattern of actually the devil knows that God stands by his word. The devil is a liar and there is a father of it. But God is true and God is not a man that he should lie. The devil is sure and knows that when God says, I have forsaken you, that is it. How is he able to predict some of these things? Because he is able to influence some of them.
Oh, yes.
For example, when the story of Job comes to view, actually that is a nice bit relating to when Samuel, the spirit of Samuel was coming up in courts. They ask the devil, where have you been? Moving to and fro in the earth. Yes. Here you also see something similar. They ask someone, what are you seeing? I see gods, as it were, to and fro, moving up. There is a kind of a tempest, telling you that in all the affairs of men, he is present seeing. He is present. He is present.
Participating.
Actually, you'll appreciate it even more. That as you read through the books of Kings and Chronicles, you would realize the Lord. It would be like the Lord stirred up the heart of so and so. Of course, God holds those people at bay because God allows certain things to happen. That's why, for example, the children of Israel, before they came, I forget exactly, but they said there's a tribe that was inhabiting the promised land that would be driven by hornets. That their iniquity was not...
the 7 nations greater than they.
Yes, that their iniquity was not yet full. The Lord held back the forces, just like you read in the book of Revelation, holding back the forces of the earth. So in these affairs of men, the devil and his angels are actually actively present in each and every one of them. From the birth of a child to the growth, we can read about, there's a mouthful, but there's also the bit of guardian angels and so on. But just to wrap it up, the reason why the devil is able to do this is because he is present in the affairs of men. If anything, he reads the scriptures even more than the Christians do themselves. He knows the word of God is sure, and he knows, he read Deuteronomy 18. He read Leviticus 26, as you mentioned, and he knew if you consult familiar spirits,
the Lord won't be with you.
The Lord will not be with you.
When he's not with you, sure defeat on your side.
And of course, your enemies, has been predicted, will destroy you and reign over you.
So it is as simple as the devil will predict to you through a horoscope and say, tomorrow you will meet a bald-headed man and he will slap you.
Okay.
And the devil knows that he has some bald-headed agent who will influence the bald-headed agent to come and slap you. And he will say, oh my, the prediction came to pass. When he's actually the one making it happen.
He can cause it to rain. He can cause sickness. Of course,
yes.
Somewhere in one of the nice Bible Q&As I watched on 3ABN, they're asking, can a Christian be possessed by a devil? And of course the answer was no. A mere believer, because even devils believe and tremble.
Oh, yes.
He says, but a true Bible-believing Christian cannot, because two cannot occupy the same place.
Oh, yes.
The Holy Spirit is occupying, or the devil is occupying. Christ put that clear. If you cast out one, he goes into the wilderness,
yes.
picks 7, comes back to and occupies. Yes.
But it can also go again in this direction.
Yes.
Simply. Isaiah, I believe it is in chapter 46.
Yes.
Here is where God gives a dare to the other gods of the nations who are false. And he says, starts from verse 5, and says, to whom will you liken me, and make me equal and compare me, that we may be like? God is putting a challenge. From verse 6, he starts to narrate the process on how they make an idol. They lavish gold out of the bag and weigh silver and balance, blah, blah. Verse 7, they bear him on the shoulder. And verse 8 now he says, remember this, and shew yourselves men. Bring it again to mind, O ye transgressors. Verse 9, remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none like me. I am God, and there is none like me. Verse 10, what makes him God, unlike any other? Declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. So what is God's dare to the other God? He says, if you can declare the end from the beginning, you are a God. None can do it. If Satan could predict the future with certainty and accuracy, he would become God. But he is not. Now, how does Satan do it? Now, if I come and I say, there is a football match between Manchester United and Arsenal, and I say Arsenal will win, and Arsenal indeed wins, will I have declared the end from the beginning like God? Oh, I will not have foretold, I will have predicted. How will I predict it? I'll come and say, now Arsenal bought good players, they are on form. Manchester United has many people who are injured, their manager is not the best. I'll look at factors A, B, C, D, E, and I will say, based on these factors, there's a 98% chance Arsenal will win. And if they win, good for me. Same thing Satan does. He calculates and sees the factors more than, of course, humans can ever see. He knows what he's saying behind closed doors. When he says that some person is going to slap you, perhaps he heard him saying, I'm going to slap him. And so Satan does not foretell. He predicts according to what he has seen happening. And like God, who has seen it actually, the end from the beginning. That has been a long jazz to clarify some big question, by the way. Satan has limited powers. He does not know the future. So, how do you bring it into Saul's life? When he says that you will die tomorrow, you and your sons, do they continue and die?
Yes, they do. We can find out First
We were
Samuel
in 1 Samuel chapter
31.
31. And how does God and Satan have to do with it?
Now we can read here. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of, because remember this was the terror of Saul.
Yes.
For him to go here, because the Philistines were being stirred up. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa.
Mm.
And the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and his sons. The Philistines slew Jonathan.
The most valiant.
They slew Abinadab,
Oh, yes.
Malchishua, Saul's sons.
Oh, yes.
The battle was sore also against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was so wounded of the archers. And then Saul said unto his arm-bearer, Draw thy sword and thrust me through therewith, lest the uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his arm-bearer would not, for he was so afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. And when his arm-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword and died. Wow. So Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his arm-bearer, and all his men that same day together.
So, who killed Saul? Like, literally, himself. The prediction that he had, he himself, he implemented it.
He was a self-fulfilling prophet.
Because the devil from the beginning, his goal was to make Saul desperate and hopeless. So in that state of despondency, he can now finally fulfill the devil's own prediction. And
his desire for that is ultimately one thing, to destroy and to kill.
Of course.
Whatever the means.
Saul, in his death, he demonstrates some cowardly bravery. He has nothing left to lose, and therefore he fights with all that he has. I find these soul-stirring words in Patriarchs and Prophets 6:81, the 4th paragraph. Listen. On the plain of Shunem, they are very sad by the way, and the slopes of Mount Gilboa, the armies of Israel and the hosts of the Philistines closed in mortal combat. Though the fearful scene in the cave of Endor had driven all hope from his heart, Saul fought with desperate valor for his throne and his kingdom. But it was in vain. The men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. 3 brave sons of the king died at his side. The archers pressed upon Saul. He had seen his soldiers falling around him, and his princely sons cut down by the sword. Himself wounded, he could neither fight nor fly. So he was no longer in protection by the sons and his special forces, and himself too wounded to run or even fight hard. He takes plan B, turns to his fellow, to the bearer, and says, what shall we do? He says, thrust me through with your sword. As in the previous episode, we had started to get some indications. Perhaps this bearer was Doeg himself. Now, friend in need is a friend indeed. This time, Doeg was not a friend in need. He could not smite Saul. The same man who could, without any remorse, cut all the prophets of God, the priest at Nob, he could not kill his fellow, a sinner. And Saul says, now, interestingly, there are these 2 accounts both given. In one, it seems like Saul, the account, one of them is the one which is on the ground, which shows that Saul thrust himself through with the sword. Whose sword? The sword of Doeg.
Okay.
But when we see the other report who comes to David, for me, it shows that I am the one who thrust him through.
I was actually looking for that portion. Yes, yes.
I think it is in the 2nd Samuel.
Yes.
Of course, that's how it begins. And that's verse what? Verse 6 of chapter 1.
And the young man that told him said, as I happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa, behold, Saul leaned upon his spear, and lo, the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. When he looked behind him, he saw me and called me, and I answered, Here I am. And he said unto me, Who art thou? And I answered, I am an Amalekite. And he said unto me, Again I pray thee, upon me slay me, for anguish has come upon me, because my life is yet whole in me. So I stood upon him and slew him, because I was sure that he could not live after he was fallen. And I took the crown that was upon his head and the bracelet that was upon his arm, and brought them thither unto my Lord.
So,
of course, and eventually...
So who should we believe? This news bearer, should we believe him that he killed Saul, or should we believe this account now in 1 Samuel 31 that Saul killed himself?
I'm tempted to believe that this is a continuation, that on top of thrusting himself, because remember here they're saying, remember the arm bearer fell on his own sword, and Saul fell on his own.
Yes.
But here they use the word spear, and they're saying his life did depart from him. He actually remained alive.
So he may have fallen on the sword,
but not died. It was a mortal wound, but not something that led to his death. And he says, I have not fully, it hasn't fully killed me. And actually, this is one of, if my direction is correct, think about it. The very men that this would be in one way, revenge, but also a fulfillment. That in one way, these are the people you were supposed to kill and did not, but also, this was a sort of taking revenge in a way. What was this young man, an Amalekite, venturing near Mount Gilboa doing?
When all the Amalekites killed except the...
we know for a fact that most of the time, whenever there is war, no one desires to go near there, except someone going to loot and to steal. And you realize that was what is the first thing that he picked? The crown and the bracelet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, now this young man, in the other, another angle which I will bring it in, is this. This young man, number one, did not know about, can I call it the holiness of David? Did not know that David did not seek to kill Saul. The young man thought that David was a sworn enemy of Saul. And knew that if I go to David and I deliver the news that I am the one who killed Saul, he's going to promote me.
Just like Doeg was always close to Saul. Because
he did not know that David had a pure and a clean heart. And therefore, when he brings the news and David kills him, David also kills him unknowingly. He takes his report for truth. But the truth is, this young man did not kill Saul. He found Saul and the arm bearer after they had just died. He says, oops, this is Saul. This is a good moment for me to take credit. He takes his crown and bracelet, runs to David. So the account of chapter 31 is the true one. David kills himself with
Saul,
sorry.
Yes.
With the arm bearer, still thinking it may be dog, with his own sword. Now, interestingly, this is a sword that had killed the priests at Nob.
Interesting.
The same sword that has killed the priests has returned, both upon the one who commanded the killing and upon the executor of the killing itself. It reminds me of the words of Jesus to Peter. You remember Matthew 26, verse 52. And then Jesus said unto him, put up again thy sword into its place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. The words of Jesus in Revelation about the beast. Revelation 13, verse 10. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with a sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. And so the sin, not just of necromancy, but also of killing the priest at Nob, has been recompensed upon the doer himself. Now, I am finding one thing. When David receives the news, I didn't want to go much into receiving the news by David, but it is so sweet that you cannot bypass it. In chapter 1 of 2 Samuel, David sings a lamentation for the death of Saul. The lamentation starts in verse 17. In verse 17, David lamented with his lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan, his son. Verse 19, the beauty of Israel is slain upon thy high places. How are the mighty fallen? It's in plural. He's not just a man for Jonathan, but Saul is also mighty. Now, verse 20, interesting. It says, tell it not in Gath. Publish it not in the streets of Askelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. What are you getting here? You know, in the church sometimes we have people who may not be our personal friends. And when they fall, though they are wicked truly, but the greatest fear of David was the rejoicing that will happen in Gath, the daughters of the Philistines. May God give us the brains to know that when a warrior in a church falls and it is published in Gath, the reproach is upon not just the fallen one, but even upon the name of the Lord of Israel and upon we ourselves. You know, Abraham says to Lot, let there be no strife between me and you, for we be brethren. In the previous verse I just said, because the Canaanite was in the land. We should always be cautious about the Canaanites and Philistines who watch our fallen brothers.
Not to give an occasion for the enemies of God to glory and be happy. And also I love the nice quote that says, when a man falls, don't laugh, learn. You know, it's very easy to laugh at others when someone does something wrong. We may not laugh, but C.D. Brooks has a very beautiful sermon called The Laughter of God. Okay. It's a very interesting sermon, but the bit about it is that we should not feel joy at the loss of any. I want you to think with me, if our God takes no pleasure in the destruction of anyone, how then could you take pleasure in the destruction of anyone?
Like even if it is Satan himself.
It's...
In Rushiga we have a proverb that says that when you find a cane that was used to cane your co-wife,
you throw it away.
In fact, burn it. Because you know what next?
It will turn.
It will turn and cane yourself. It's never reason to rejoice at the fall of our enemies. You know what makes it worse? Present day churches and preachers who have filled the people with the philosophy and the theology of God, may you defeat my enemies, may they perish, may they die, and may they... I was one day, I remember I think in around near to there, I was listening to one of the biggest televangelists in my side, my nativity. He preached something interesting and says, Herod was seeking to kill Jesus, and he died. Today I want us all to wear kwambala amani, to put on power, and pray for our enemies to die. Stop this cowardice of God, bless my enemies. No. Let your enemies die. Herod died.
Is that the gospel?
I have no idea. Is it God's will that your enemies should die to begin with? You may find you are actually their enemy, they are not your enemy.
Actually, God says it this way, because he is the God of all flesh. He says, vengeance is mine. In Matthew 5 and Romans 12, Paul says, don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And then you shall heap. I know it's one of those things where you heap hot coals on the heads of your so-called enemies.
Yes. Wow. Now, even more interestingly, after seeing the downfall of Saul and the rejoicing in Gath and among the daughters of the Philistines, is what they do with his body. What do they do with him? What is that? When the Philistines come on the morrow, that is in verse 8.
Yes, verse 8. And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor.
That's verse 9?
Yes. Oh, you want from 8. And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, because the looting they would do, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head, stripped off his armor, and sent it in the land of the Philistines round about to publish it in the house of their idols and among the people.
Now,
a fear that David had.
Exactly. Now, I want you to remember with me, when David reaches Nob, he's given some food from the shewbread in the temple. But also he's given a sword.
Of Goliath.
Sword of Goliath.
Yes.
You remember when David killed Goliath? He took his sword, chopped off Goliath's head, and he went marching with the head of Goliath and the sword. Same as happened to Saul. It looks like a sweet revenge. You killed our hero Goliath, chopped his head and took his sword and put it in your tabernacle. We are also doing the same. Take his head, put it in the temple of Dagon. Take his armor. Why do they take his armor? Is it mentioned? Was it?
Bashan. They put his armor, verse 10.
Yes.
And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth.
The tabernacle, interestingly.
And they fastened his body to the wall of Bashan. Beth Shan. Place of security.
That's the meaning.
Yes.
Wow. You see how God has lost this battle, like how it has ended with only rejoicing in the camp of the heathen. More sad news after the break.
AvventoMedia ekutuusaako obubaka obw'amawulire amalungi wansi w'omulamwa okugamba nti olw'ekigambo kyo tutunuulidde omusingi omunywevu gunnantanyenyezeka nga ye Bayibuli yokka ate yonna. Obubaka buno bukulembeddwamu omubuulizi w'enjiri Yonasaani Matovu Munnagomba. Abaffe, Bayibuli yo egamba ki mu nsi eno etabanguka buli olukedde nga tuwulira entalo, musisi, amataba n'endwadde ezeeyongera? Kiki Katonda kyatusuubiramu mu biro bino mwe tuwangaalira? Bino byonna byakwanukulwa mu Gospel eno ku 3ABN TV okuva ng'ennaku z'omwezi 28 ogw'omukaaga June okutuusa ng'ennaku z'omwezi 21 ogw'omusanvu July 2024 buli lunaku essaawa 3 ez'ekiro. Eri ggwe ali emitala w'amayanja tujja kubeera ku mukutu gwaffe ogwa Avvento Productions ku YouTube. AvventoMedia, flying the gospel to the whole world. Bunyisa enjiri mu nsi yonna.
Era oyo naawe abalala okubeera ababuulizi, n'abalala abalunda, n'abayigiriza, olw'okutuukiriza abatukuvu, olw'omulimu ogw'okuweereza, olw'okuzimba omubiri gwa Kristo. Yateekawo okuyiga Bayibuli okw'abakulu, the quarterly adult Sabbath school lesson, n'ekigendererwa eky'okukula n'okutuukirira mu kukkiriza.
Okuzibwa kw'obulamu mu linnya lya Yesu tekitegeeza nti olwo buli kye twogeddeko kigenda kukolebwa mu budde bwaffe, mu ngeri yaffe ne mu ndowooza yaffe.
N'olwekyo lesson week eno ekuyigiriza enjiri ey'emirembe n'emirembe ey'obulokozi. Etteeka lya Katonda eritajjulukuka, ngamba amateeka 10.
Okuviira ddala munda oli muntu mulungi n'ebikolwa ku muntu kabikola ki?
Biba automatic.
Biba automatic kubanga obikola mu kwagala, obikola mu kusanyuka, obikola mu mirembe.
Yogera ku biseera eby'enkomerero okutuukirira mu mpisa ez'okutya Katonda.
Naye ate nga n'omwoyo ansika nkole bwe nti.
Yes.
Kati nenseŋŋaana nga ndi awo wakati naye ng'ate amaanyi ag'omubiri mangi nnyo gampala awala okukola ekyo kubanga ekyo kyenjagala.
Nga bwe twetegekera okujja kwa Yesu Kristo okusembedde.
N'olwekyo we tuli weewali omugguukiriro ogwa boundary egenda okusunsula.
Lesson week eno Sabiri paka saa 3 ez'akawungeezi nga twaniza Sabiti ku 3ABN Uganda, Avvento Productions ku YouTube, nange Yonasaani Matovu Munnagomba.
in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, when you do something as a Christian, the reason why people will never come and say an individual or look at an individual, they usually put it
About event.
about event in general. I got some interesting verse from the book of Acts that when Acts 17, when the Christians moved, I think somewhere they said, these people who have turned the world upside down have come hither too as well. They have come to cause us problems. It wasn't Jesus Christ, it wasn't Peter, it wasn't James, it was
these people.
So even us, it's very important to know that whatever you do as an individual in the church, the image of the church is at stake, and ultimately the image of God. I mean the name of God. So here we see Saul is killed, his body is taken to a place, he's taken to a temple. Now this is also a fulfillment of one of the interesting bits that he decided his closing moments and the sealing of his fate was in a cave and in an occultic place. So you see still, if it were not, as we shall see, the men of Jabesh Gilead, I think, he would have remained there as something, as an abomination. Or not an abomination, but as an eternal shame to people who actually don't follow the word of God. So we come here to Saul, chapter 1 Samuel 31, verse 11. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth Shan and came to Jabesh and burnt them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. Here comes an interesting bit I can throw to you about cremation. What do you think about this scenario at this point?
Actually, I have made this question before.
Yes.
About, in the end, the resurrection of the cremated. Shall they be able to resurrect if they don't have physical bodies present? I'd ask the same question, those who are buried. Do their physical bodies remain feasibly resurrectable? The thing is that it is summarized by Paul in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, that powerful resurrection chapter.
Behold, I show you a mystery.
And he shows us more than just a mystery. And says in verse 35. In verse 35, he says, "But some man will say, how are the dead raised up? And with what body do they come?" By the way, according to basic science, when we die, we rot. And we rot and rot and rot until we are one with the soil.
We return to the dust from which
we came. And it goes even as far as the geologists say we become oil and they burn us in candles.
If there's high pressure enough applied to that biomatter or
maybe some of us even turn into diamonds. I mean, whatever science is there. So cremation, the end product is not as different as that of those who are buried. But here is the hope. Verse 36, the hope comes in form of an insult, Holy One. "Thou fool, that which thou sawest is not quickened except it die. And that which thou sawest not that body that shall be, but bear again, it may chance of wheat or some other grain." Now verse 38 is the hope. "But God giveth it a body as it hath pleased him, and to every seed his own body." So actually in the second the first resurrection,
yes,
we are not, it's not that our bodies are resurrected, but rather we are given new bodies. So the cremated, they have the same hope as those who are buried. It's a new incorruptible body. It does not need the old one for a raw material that is created from, I can say nothing, that not where God gets it from, but it's a totally new body. And you know the funny thing also is that we don't have a lot of cremation cases in the Bible. But Saul is given here as an example of him and his sons. Now we have seen before that before the break, Saul, the sword which he used to slay at Nob, that sword slays him, just like about the beast of Revelation 13, it says here that killeth you with the sword, be killed with the sword. No, in Daniel, I believe chapter 7, it says the beast was slain and his body was given to the flames. And then it says about Satan in Ezekiel 28 that a fire
shall bring a fire from the midst of him
and then destroy him completely.
Yes.
Saul became not just a prototype of evil, but also a type of the beast that shall be slain, that has persecuted the servants of God. You know, the beast also started, can I say as a joke, apostatizing small. The beast comes to execute the commands of God, but leaves only one, spares one Agag. And so Saul does so many things that are in harmony with what the antitype of the Antichrist would finally fulfill. And yet one thing that we see in Saul is that he had done one single act in 1 Samuel, I believe, chapter 11, when Nahash, the Amorite, attacked the men of Jabesh Gilead. Saul saves them in his prosperous times. And that simple act of kindness earns him a decent burial. Let's never underestimate the power of one simple act, whether from a friend or a foe. It may save us where we are not.
Yes, thank you so much. Now we are to glean. I loved that analogy of putting a seed and then the seed dies and then you realize for it to come up there must be death. Of course we have to also put it in right context, that all this you realize that there's the aspect of Christ involved, him giving us his body, him quickening us, him being our light, him being our savior. So the story of Saul doesn't leave Israel the same. This is something critical that we should also appreciate, that when I read some of the scriptures, you find they always say the city of David. They talk about the servant of God, David, and multiple times talking about David. Saul is scarcely mentioned in future times.
Yes.
I think his life was also, in a sense, because God has decided to do things a particular way, and man also wants to do things a particular way. The reason why you have the seal of God and the mark of the beast is because this is the number of man, this is the seal of man, and man doing it in his own things. His whole life was a life of disobedience. His life was a life of course we have learned very many object lessons from this, that you've seen a backdrop, you've seen what happens in the backdrop, the supernatural. I think this is one of those scriptures where you actually see verbatim something of this sort. It's actually not found anywhere else in the kind of uniqueness it has. You see God trying to reveal to man that there is a power that is behind this. And you'll find out that throughout the Old Testament, as you read through, not very many places will you find them talking about. Of course, you find in another place for the servant of Elisha, where they open up, I think they were the Syrians or Assyrians who were attacking, and then he says, "Oh God, if you could open the eyes of this man that he could see," and the curtain is also opened again. Yes. You still see the aspect of the supernatural. You see this bit of the great controversy and these supernatural powers happening. Then, do you then think we who are living in the last days, who are living at such a time as this, anything less will be manifested, anything less will happen, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You've mentioned something interesting about Saul being less referred to.
Yes.
We have the city of David.
Okay.
We don't have the city of Saul.
Okay.
Now we have a mountain of Saul.
Okay.
I'm down mentioning it, I'm down naming it as the mountain of Saul.
Gilboa.
Okay. He dies upon Gilboa.
Okay.
And then in the lamentation of David,
yes.
I'm in 2 Corinthians. I thought I'm in 2 Samuel.
I was also wondering, I was looking for that portion where Paul mentions, okay, he is Saul, but
okay,
but his name is also changed to signify the change
of heart that happens in him. In 2 Samuel, that the lamentation is in chapter 1.
Actually, before you hit that, there's an interesting lesson there as well. Saul, who is the New Testament Paul, his kind of life was one who was among God's people, but one who was persecuting God's people. And his change of heart is something that is a miraculous that God can change anyone. You know, the story of Saul ends in a kind of hope. Maybe for Jonathan and the brothers, we may not know how that. We know that at least they were friends of David, and most likely we are friends, because in this whole, we don't know if at Endo he went with his sons. That we are not given. If they did not, then hopefully there is hope for these ones. But for Saul, his story almost ends hopelessly. Yes, in the earthly terms, he's buried well, but it doesn't mean that in the eyes of God, he had made a change.
Well,
Mount Gilboa, as you
Gilboa, yes.
Yes.
Verse 21 of 2 Samuel 1. David says, "Ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, neither let there be rain upon you, no fields of offering. For there the shield of the mighty is vilely cast away, the shield of Saul as though he had not been anointed with oil." David has cast the hill of Gilboa, which received the blood of the slain Saul. And now I find something even more scaring. In this publication, the Review and Herald, March 11, 1890, paragraph 13.
Yes.
The writer Ellen White says, to Adventists now, this is not to anyone else.
Yes.
Says, "Brethren, shall we not all of us leave our Lords there? And when we leave this meeting," this is 1890, but following the proceedings of 1888. "And when we leave this meeting, may it be with the truth burning in our souls like fire shut up in our bones. You will meet those who will say, 'You are too much excited over this matter,' that's of righteousness by faith.
Yes.
You are too much in earnest. You should not be reaching for the righteousness of Christ and making so much of that. You should preach the law." Now she reacts and says, "As a people, we have preached the law until we are as dry as the hills of Gilboa, that had neither dew nor rain. We must preach Christ in the law, and there will be sap and nourishment in the preaching that will be as food to the famishing flock of God." I just couldn't resist the Gilboa so and the curse point, and how we are making ourselves sometimes Gilboas in preaching Christless, compassionless, spiritless messages upon those whom we meet. No. Christ is the rain that can make Gilboa fertile again.
It's also critical to, whenever they talk about a change of rain, I've taken some opportunities to listen to the president of this country speak, and many times when he's starting his speeches, he always takes you back. He says in 1986 and in 1996 and in 1986 and so on. I also see here we have the pre-Israel and the post-Israel. The post-Israel is one where I am sure David learned.
Yes.
I think of all, actually, I was having a conversation once with someone and I asked, this came up, of the kings that committed apostasy and so on in Israel. Whenever it comes to David sinned, yes, with Bathsheba and all the other things and the numbering of the people and all that he did. We're not contrasting characters of comparing people among themselves, but we're simply saying, you see that he learned some things from the previous monarch. Think about it, immediately when David came to prominence, it's hard to talk about Saul and not talk about David. When he came to prominence, one of the first things he said, "I am sleeping in a very well-furnished house." Where is the ark of God?
Dwelling in a tent.
Why is the ark of God dwelling in it? You see, the restoring of God, because think about it, a priesthood had been slain. You had infiltrators and also slaying of the mighty of Israel, the mighty that have fallen, not only Saul, but also his children and all. You see, the post-Saul's era, where Judah comes back and is reigning, the post-Saul era where there was a respect for God. Yes, because by the time of Elijah and Elisha, we have Jezebel and Ahab and all these people who are still tormenting the people of God. Tormenting the prophets and the servants as well, the servants of God as well. But you see, there is a shift. Some things remain, but then there are some things that are irrevocably changed.
Yes.
When it comes, there was always now here you have think about it at this point. When they are talking about the story of Saul, he had chased away the wizards and the people with familiar spirits, but he had not. You don't see any striving of the people of Israel and the familiar spirits and all that. You don't see that. You don't see that idea. You see Saul as an individual unit. In the subsequent kings, each of these kings would lead Israel. Maybe it may not be a very critical observation, but in a large sense it does apply, that it's the king who leads the whole nation away. A king leads. Here you see Saul going alone in the night in the covers of a cloak, and he goes alone. But here you're seeing this person sets up an altar openly and replaces God. So the post-Israel, the pre and post-Israel here, there are very critical turning points in that story as we move.
The post-Israel is very remarkable.
Yes.
You know where God says in Nahum, is it 1 verse 9?
Yes.
That he shall make an utter end
of affliction. Affliction shall not raise.
Affliction shall not raise the second time. Why and how will God make an utter end? How will he make sure that the affliction does not rise the second time? Is by destroying the cause of sin, that's Satan himself, and then all his accomplices completely. As long as they are still in the universe, affliction will remain, because moreover they are being afflicted. If Satan and sinners are in hell burning forever, affliction will not have gone away forever. The same applies. As long as Saul is still, can I say, with his family, is lingering around, though dead, in a sense, affliction still rose. How is this? 2 Samuel chapter 21.
Yes.
In the days of David, there was a huge and terrible famine that attacked Israel. David went and inquired of the Lord, what is the cause? And he knew that it was because in verse 1, then there was a famine in the days of David 3 years, year after year. And David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered, it is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites. So David goes and asks the Gibeonites, please, what shall we do for you as restitution for the injustice that was done to you by Saul, despite the fact that you had already a covenant with Joshua? And they answered the king, that is in verse 5. And they answered the king, the man that consumed us and that devised against us, that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the coasts of Israel. Verse 6, let 7 men of his sons be delivered unto us, and we will hang them up unto the Lord in Gibeah of Saul.
Is that a sacrifice to the Lord by hanging?
I have no idea if whether Gibeonites' words should be taken for present truth. And to give the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord did choose. And the king said, I will give them. Verse 7, the king spared Mephibosheth, of course. Now, verse 8, but the king took the 2 sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bare unto Saul, Ammoni and Mephibosheth. There was another Mephibosheth besides the Mephibosheth of Jonathan. The 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Meholathite. Verse 9, he delivered them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them in the hill before the Lord. And they fell all 7 together, and were put to death in the days of the harvest, in the first days, in the beginning of the barley harvest. Now we notice they were sons of Rizpah and Michal. Now, what does that do? Rizpah, of course, became very destitute. Being bereaved of all these sons in one day. And so she responds in verse 10. And Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it for her upon the rock from the beginning of the harvest until water dropped upon them out of heaven. I don't know how long that was, because the harvest is always in the summer. According to Jeremiah 8 verse 20, harvest is the summer. So, until water dropped upon them out of heaven, and suffered neither the birds of the air to rest on them by day, nor the beasts of the field by night. Take care of the carcasses. Verse 11, and it was told David what Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, the concubine of Saul, had done. And verse 12, David wants also now to compensate Rizpah for the harm done by the Gibeonites. to David, to Saul, though he was guilty, and the house. 12. And David went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son from the men of Jabesh Gilead, which had stolen them from the street of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hanged them, when the Philistines had slain Saul in Gilboa. Verse 13. And brought up from thence the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son, and they gathered the bones of them that were hanged. 14. And the bones of Saul and Jonathan his son buried they in the country of Benjamin in Zerah, in the sepulchre of Kish his father. And they performed all that the king commanded. And after that, God was entreated for the land. So the fruits of the bloodthirst and the sins of Saul, this is the point where finally they come to an end. Question would be, why hasn't Mephibosheth perished along with all the rest for God to be entreated of them?
The son of Saul, Jonathan, asked David that he should show kindness to his house.
Wonderful.
Back as they were actually, I think, in the field of wheat, I forget.
Yeah, chapter 18 of 1 Samuel.
And here David is keeping his word. But also the kind of, and it also shows you the character of Jonathan towards the end of his life. That's why I have, as a side note, confidence that he will be part of
the first resurrection
of the faithful. Yes.
Amen. We praise the Lord. It also shows us that in the words of the book of Ezekiel, chapter 18, the proverb shall cease in Israel that the fathers ate the bitter fruits and the children's teeth were set on edge. Jonathan made this covenant of peace with David, and for Jonathan's sake and also for Mephibosheth himself, they are spared. The rest of the house of Saul, actually, we shall notice, all through they remained defiant of David. We shall go as far as in the future, as we microscope on David, we shall notice he even had, in the days when he was being overthrown by Absalom, he was still being haunted by the remainders of the house of Saul, but this means servants, not the blood remainders. So all this had been taken out of the land for the sake of the reign of David to continue smoothly. And finally, still on Mephibosheth and why he survives, Psalm 50 and verse 3, and how it affects me and you. Psalm 50 and verse 3, it says, our God shall come and shall not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him, and shall be very tempestuous round about him. So that is God coming in a destroying fire. Isaiah 6 told us that those who purify themselves, those who eat swine, eat his semen, who shall be destroyed together. But there are those who will survive. Verse 4. He shall call to the heavens from above, and to the earth, that he may judge his people. Verse 5, who are the survivors? Gather my saints together unto me, those that have done what? Made a covenant with me by sacrifice. Just as the covenant of David and Jonathan, that friendship, that love greater than that of brothers, saves Mephibosheth in the great slaughter. So will those who have made a covenant with Christ by sacrifice be saved in the oncoming slaughter at the end of everything. May that be me, and may that be you, dear viewer of the microscope. Until next time, God will bless you.